We just had an awkward moment. I needed the microphone and put out my hand to get it, and he went to shake it, and then I gave him like a paw for a hand. It was weird. I'm gonna tell you a story about second grade Joel. And because I like to end stories, I like to know how they end, I'm gonna give you the end of the story. Second grade Joel poops his pants. That's how it ends. I grew up a gassy child. Like any kid, I thought flatulence was pretty hilarious. My dad helped, of course. And so I go to school one day, second grade, and my stomach feels a little bit off. Not unlike flatulence. And the whole day I've got these stomach pains. But you're in school, and at that point, I'm having the realization that you can't just cut loose in the classroom. It's not done. It's not decent. Plus, you just don't know. Am I going to do something that's loud, and everybody turns and looks at me and says, ew? And the whole day, my stomach just hurts, and it's that feeling of I've just got to let out what's inside. But I'm holding it in. A time comes that afternoon where everybody's shuffling back to their desk, one of those transitional periods where you're moving from like art to math or something, and people are shuffling, and there's this brief window, this moment where it's loud. I'm like, now is my chance. So, like, just let it ride. And it was silent, but also deadly. And I realized that something terrible has just happened. And I'm sitting there. What am I gonna, it's the end of the day. We've got like one more subject left. And I'm thinking, it will be okay, because I don't have to move from this chair until I get up and go home. Now, you ought to know that whatever happened or whatever I ate the day before had made me ill. And so this was not a solid situation, if we get what I'm saying, okay? So I'm like, hey, just sit on it, wait it out. It's gonna be fine. Now, in second grade Joel loved affirmation from teachers. You would call that a teacher's pet. That's what I was, and I loved it. I didn't want to do anything that stepped out of line. Classic first child rule follower. So when Mrs. Lechner came up and said, Joel, would you pass out the math assignments? I'm confronted with a dire choice. I'm gonna tell you a story about decisions that were made that day, where second grade Joel chose honor over disobedience. How bad can it be? Spoiler alert, very bad. I'm gonna tell you a story about a second grader who loved to wear sweatpants to school. And his friend Jason, who yelled out to the class, Joel, did you poop your pants? And now the teacher looks over and recognizes this situation and calls for immediate evac and pulls me out. And she takes me to the hallway, and she doesn't know what to do. She's a young teacher. She's never navigated these muddy waters before. God, it's just so dumb. But there we stood on that brown Tuesday, just looking at one another in the hallway. And I don't know what's happening to my body. I'm ashamed. My stomach still hurts because I'm sick. And she just doesn't know what to say. And she looks at me, she goes, what happened? Which is a dumb question, because you know. And I just looked at her and said, I thought it was gonna be silent. My mom came and picked me up from school, and before I got in the car, she's like, wait, honey, wait. And she like started putting down paper towels she had pulled out of the bathroom. You don't want to mess up the car seats on our station wagon. I stayed out of school for a couple days because I was sick, but when I came back, everybody started treating me differently. Like, you know how people get and how kids get. They can be mean. And so after that, I was now, Joel, the kid who pooped his pants in second grade. I'm gonna tell you a story about how later on that year, I walked into class with my favorite treat for my birthday. And this is a special day. You remember when you sometimes did this in school, you get to bring in your favorite birthday treat. And my mom made this white chocolate fudge. It was my favorite. And we passed it out to all the kids, and I watched as all of them went and took it and threw it in the garbage. I'll tell you a story about how in third grade that next year, the little pod that I sat at, we pushed our tables together, we had pods, put up their folders for a month and a half because they didn't want to look at my face. In elementary school, man, it sucks. It was at that moment, in third grade at that table, going into school for like the 20th, 21st, who knows day, but well into it before the teacher made them take the folders down, that I remember having this thought. I remember it so vividly, sitting down and just staring at nobody for a whole day at this table and thinking, I'm worthless. I'm unlovable, I'm a screw up, I'm a mistake. I told a story to myself, starting in third grade, that I wasn't worth it. I told a story to myself in fifth grade that maybe being the teacher's pet was stupid, so I'd start acting out, so I did. And I fell in with a group of friends who thought that was really funny. But that group of friends who I stayed with fifth grade all the way through eighth grade really just wanted me to be around because I'd do the crazy stuff that nobody else would do. I told myself a story that people will only like me if I'm outrageous, but people would never like me if they knew the real me. I told myself a story starting in high school and it continued through college that I'm not going to get any better, that my world is broken, that I am broken, that I'm unlovable. So I started to seek love and affirmation from anybody else who would give it, even people who might use me, even people who might harm me, even people who would break my heart and then try to grab it back. Told myself a story that ended with me walking into a counselor's office and being diagnosed with major depression my senior year of college and an anxiety disorder and starting treatment for that. I told myself a story that I'm just way too broken maybe to ever get better. That path that we walk in life is filled with a lot of different stories. We tell ourselves different stories too on the big story that we're on. And there's one story that came up a couple of different times as I went through conferences like this. I went to my first Steubenville conference my freshman year of high school. I kept a journal in it. It wasn't a journal to God, it was a journal to my girlfriend, Rebecca. That was for the fellas. That was for the guys. They heard about Rebecca earlier. Okay. And I would write out like what was happening throughout the course of the weekend. And I remember hitting this moment in my freshman year in that book where I wrote about coming to know who Jesus was and this big conversion moment I had. It's kind of fun to look back at now. But after I had that conversion moment, I came to know the Lord. I started telling myself this new story, which was kind of like an angry story. Jesus, like, why weren't you there? And I started telling myself that story through college. Like, Jesus, if you save, if you're a healer, if you're the divine physician, why didn't you take this away? Depression's really hard. My anxiety sometimes is crippling. Why can't you just make it go? In fact, why weren't you there in second grade to bring healing about my life then? Why weren't you there with me in third grade when I started formulating these terrible ideas? Why weren't you with me when I was in middle school and I fell into these patterns of self-destruction because I wanted so badly to be liked? Why didn't you speak truth into my life in any of those moments? Why weren't you there? And that's a pretty rough story to tell. It's a pretty big question, and we're not the first people to ask that question. It's tough when we start to think back to some of those memories That we don't realize the impact they've had on our lives, but they have. Because for some of us, there's something silly that somebody said to you that you've internalized and has become a story that you tell. I have a friend, and he told this story about how his sister said, I don't think you're as good of a singer as dad. And for years after that, he wouldn't sing because he told himself this story. I'm not as good of a singer as dad. Why sing? I have another person we got on this conversation after that story where she said she was driving and they were driving through California and one of her parents made a comment about how fit everybody was. Sort of like a sarcastic, like everybody in California is out running. And she looked out the window and saw a woman running, and at that moment she said, I am not beautiful enough because I don't look like that, and internalized that for years. Like sometimes it's something just so silly. The person didn't even mean it. They didn't mean it to hurt us. They just sort of said it. A kid on the playground said it. A family member made some comment that we took the wrong way, but for whatever reason in that moment, like we just feel broken, and then it shatters, and those cracks go out to all different parts of our life. And sometimes it's something bigger. Sometimes somebody does say something intentionally to hurt us. They've looked at us and said, you are not good enough. You are worthless. You don't deserve to live. And it's this dumb text message. It's this dumb message we get on any of our social media accounts. I've gotten messages like that from people I don't know. And still I'm like, am I like a terrible person? Am I not good? Maybe there's bigger things that come up. Appreciate your affirmation, that's kind. But maybe there's other pieces though that are a little bit bigger. Like me, I wrestle with depression and anxiety, and that is something that has been a part of my life since I was getting out of middle school and into high school. It still is, and it's something that I'm always aware of and I'm offering up to the Lord, but maybe you're like me and that's a part of your journey, I'm a part of your story. And you look at the Lord some days and you're like, man, like it's crippling. Like, where are you in this right now? Like I'm at this youth conference with all these people, and like I know you because I am you. I put on this really brave face, and I'm really smiling, and I'm happy, but inside I'm like, I don't even know, man. If this Jesus thing is all it's cracked up to be, I just want to know what it means to go a day without having a panic attack or feeling worthless. I want to know what that life's like. And even deeper things that happen, addiction, whether it's a substance, whether it's pornography, whether it's some other attachment you have. I bet right now if I asked you what that is, if you're wrestling with just a real vice or an addiction, the moment that it started, you know, I know. And you're like, Jesus, why weren't you there in that moment to like stop me? Or to stop it, or to stop me from seeing that thing or that person offering that stuff or being in that situation. You know, all the way down to a moment that we lost somebody in our life. A moment that we have tragedy strike and a friend, a family member, somebody we were close to, and one day they're here and then they're not. Or they go through an illness and it changes them. And sometimes we have situations where people get sick and through that process, you know, they get better, but they're never really the same, and we just wonder. Because you all have these moments in our life where we die, where like a death takes place. And we're still here, but there's this moment. You know, and for me, it's this silly story in second grade, but at that moment, a part of me sort of fell apart, this innocence. And it manifested in all these ways and stupid things that kids say and like, but they hurt. And then you start to internalize it and they build and they crack and they shatter. And pretty soon you formed this whole story about who you are. And then we seal it up because it hurts. You know, I didn't want to tell you a story about pooping my pants in second grade. I looked at my wife, I'm like, I don't think I want to tell this story. That happened 25 years ago. You know, like 25 years ago is when that happened, and still I'm like, man, I don't think I want to tell like 2,300 teenagers and have that recorded for YouTube. You ever read the comments on there? It still like brings up something inside of me that like hurts. And so we seal those things off. We don't go near them. We put a wall in front of them. We say, okay, that's here. I'm just going to ignore that part. I'm going to push it over to the side. I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to move on. I'm going to leave that area where I feel death, where I feel broken. I'm going to walk away. But we can never just walk away. It's always there. And we know it's there, and we don't look at it, but it's there. Jesus knows something about tombs. And there's this great account in the Gospel of John of Jesus going to a tomb. And I love this story. And if you have a chance, I want you to go back and read the whole thing. It's in John chapter 11, and it's long. So I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to read some of it directly from the Word, and some of it I'm just going to paraphrase. I'm going to give you a little commentary, because I think this is one of the most powerful things that the gospel writer John gives to us. In John chapter 11, so pray through it later on. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, in the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to Jesus saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness is not to end in death. It's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus, and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he stayed 2 days longer. Wait. Jesus loved them, so he didn't go right away. Can you imagine being the disciples in this moment? Imagine being Jesus' closest friends. Somebody shows up and they're like, Jesus, that family you're really close to, Lazarus, he's not doing good. You know, and you kind of got a knack for healing people. What do you think? And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. We'll get to it. Like every day they probably like, hey, Jesus, what about the thing with the guy that you like? Like just whispering amongst each other, like, is this like the moment where we finally figure out teleportation? It's teleportation, isn't it? He's gonna teleport us there. This could be awesome. I don't know, what did he talk about? So then after 2 days, he says, all right, let's go to Judea. And he says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awake him out of sleep. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. And then Jesus speaks plainly. Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. I don't know why I think that's so funny. You know, Jesus is like, because sometimes we do that like with things, you know, we really hyper spiritualize certain things that don't need to be hyper spiritualized. Like, oh man, I woke up late this morning. It's a spiritual attack of the evil one. No, you just didn't set your alarm. Satan didn't make you sleep in. And that's what the disciples are doing. She's like, oh, of course, yes, he's fallen asleep, Lord. He'll recover. Lazarus is dead. And they're all like, oh. But even then, they still don't get it. Because Thomas, they're like, Thomas, he said he's dead. Thomas is like, I doubt it. And then he goes, that's not in there. That's not in there. Thomas goes, let us go also, that we may die with him. Like again, this hyper spiritualization, right? So Jesus is like, Lazarus is dead. Thomas is like, I'll ponder that word, Lord. We shall die too. So when Jesus came to the place, he found Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. So it's been a bit. Many people had come to console Martha and Mary. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out and met him while Mary sat in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. You ever have a moment where somebody says, hey, Jesus wants to heal you. Jesus wants to save you. Jesus wants to bring good things in your life. You're like, I know, one day. When we're in heaven, every tear will be gone. Like we don't see an immediacy of Jesus healing us. That's Martha. Then she goes and calls Mary quietly and says, the teacher's here and calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now I want you to hear Mary's next words. I'll give you a dramatic reenactment because I'm married and I've seen my wife angry. And it's going to inform my dramatic reenactment. Then Mary, when she came to where Jesus was, saw him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Mary got up quickly. She doesn't go out to meet Jesus with Martha. She's in the house because she's mad. And she's not going to go out and see Jesus, who should have been here like 6 days ago. So then Martha comes, she's like, Jesus is here? It even says that in the text. She said to her quietly, Mary, Jesus is up. Jesus showed up. And she's like, what? Jesus! Right? And I want you to know something. If you go back and read this text, all she says to Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Martha's like, I know that there's a resurrection and I know that ultimately one day it's gonna be okay. Mary's just like, if you'd have been here, if you'd have showed up, all you had to do was show up. And now he's dead. Not only is he dead, Jesus, it's been 4 days. That's it. Sometimes we're like Mary. And we look at that tomb of our brokenness and we say, if you had been here, if you'd have just showed up, but you didn't. And she just falls at his feet weeping. You don't know what to do. So then Jesus says, all right, let's go. Let's go to the place where he's at. And they go there, and at one point the crowds are following because now this is kind of a scene, and they're like, this will be interesting. This guy's been dead for 4 days in the hot Jerusalem sunshine. I don't think that this one's gonna get pulled off. Because see, Jesus has resurrected people from the dead before. There are 3 times that Jesus has raised people from the dead in Scripture. He raises a little girl who dies. He raises a son of a woman who's gonna become a widow if that son dies. So he actually raises 2 other people from the dead. So the crowds know this. They're like, well, Jesus, he could still raise them from the dead, but I mean, 4 days. That's Walking Dead kind of stuff. And at one point, the crowds even say, could not the one who opened the eye of the blind have kept this man from dying? Sometimes we get like that, or we have people in our life who get like that. We share our hurt with them, and they're like, I mean, can't your Jesus have stopped that? Sometimes it's not even about us. Can't your God stop some of this suffering in the world, huh? Your Jesus who cares so much about everybody and everything, can he maybe do something about this crisis or that person suffering or this piece of brokenness? Can he fix that? I mean, he's great, right? And Jesus goes to this tomb. When Jesus saw them weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled, and he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. John 11:35, Jesus wept. Those 2 words, I need you to just take a second to step back. Because in them lies a profound truth about suffering. And no person can avoid suffering. No person in this room can avoid suffering. It's an inevitable reality of life. But in these 2 words, there's something profound about the Christian reality. I don't know what you look like when you cry. I look hideous. So I don't cry often. But when I do, it's an explosion. Because I hold it in too long, and then everything comes out of everywhere. Like, man, I get earwax, and it's not good. Like, I cry hard. I Disney princess cry, all right? I throw myself onto a bed in my pillows sobbing. Doesn't happen often, but when it happens, it's ugly. Do you know that crying is not a voluntary response? Like true crying. Like actual emotional crying is a function of the limbic system and the automatic nervous system. It means you can't control it. It is the response to an emotional cue that causes a physiological response. It's human. No other animal cries. They shed tears, but emotional crying, feeling something that moves you so deeply that you weep, that's human. And Jesus is fully human and fully divine. What does it mean for God to weep? Think about that for a second. I want you to contemplate that, just that image. What did it look like for people who have watched Jesus, strong, powerful, calm the wind, calm the storms, calm the sea, raise the dead, heal the sick, suddenly break down in front of this man's tomb and start crying, weeping, a visceral human response. Jesus wept. Jesus sees this brokenness. Now here's the thing. I ask myself this question. Why? Because if you recall at the beginning of this passage, Jesus knew what he was going to do. This death's not to end in total death. This is for the glory of God. Jesus knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He's got it in his mind. You would think that he would go there and be happy and be like, hey, everybody, cheer up, chin up, chin up, chin up. I'm here. I'm going to do something really cool. No, it's been 4 days. Trust me, going to be fine. Instead, he goes and has an emotional breakdown in front of Lazarus' tomb because he hurts with those who hurt. In the Psalm 34, it says, God is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those whose spirits are crushed. Jesus is so moved. He feels so deeply. He has such a great compassion for those who are there weeping. He feels their hurt so much that it doesn't matter that he knows what he's going to do. He suffers with them. And then he raises Lazarus from the dead. He asks them to roll away the stone, and people are like, it's gonna smell. He's like, roll away the stone. He says, Lazarus, come out of there. Rise up, Lazarus. And Lazarus does. And the people are astounded. You've got a tomb in your life that you don't want to roll the stone back from because you're like, it's gonna stink. It's really gonna stink. That part of my life, I don't want to tap into that. I don't want to get into that brokenness. I don't want to get into what happened to me, how I felt, that situation, that death. I don't want to get into what happened with my parents. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it here and tonight. We're having fun. We're tossing beach balls around. This is amazing. But here's the thing. Jesus is waiting at that tomb right now. He is weeping, and he's been at that tomb. Jesus is waiting there for you to show up. It's not Jesus who's delayed this time. It's us. Did you notice too at the beginning of this passage? Lazarus is just ill. Jesus didn't make Lazarus ill with some sort of curse so that he could go and heal him. A profound mystery of our world is that crappy things happen. And there's a whole idea of suffering. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is this document that has church teaching in it. When it talks about suffering, it says there is no simple answer to suffering. Only the whole of the Christian mystery is an answer to it. It's a big answer. But you and I, we've got these empty tombs that Jesus is waiting at, suffering with us, suffering for us. And Jesus wants to meet us there so he can bring new life to the areas that are dead. Sometimes we think Jesus wants to bring new life in areas that are good and make those things even better. And that's true. But Jesus wants to go to the areas of brokenness and say, I'm gonna bring life back here. I'm gonna bring healing here. I'm gonna start to work here. I'm gonna use this area for the glory of God. I'm gonna do something new. Jesus wants to do that for you tonight. Because we don't have a God who's too sensitive to handle our anger. Why weren't you here? We don't have a God who's powerless like the crowds thought. Well, couldn't he have done something? We don't have a God who just wants our platitudes and our pieties like, oh, well, because that's really what Martha was doing. Please don't do anything with the tomb, Jesus. Like, I get it. Resurrection, it's gonna be great. Yay, let's just move on. Jesus wants to dig in and knuckle down, to put his arm around you, throw his cloak over you, to cry with you, and then say, I am going to bring life out of this. I'm gonna bring healing out of this. That is the Lord's intention for you tonight. That you would find healing in the brokenness of that tomb. But you and me, we have to go there first. We have to step in to that challenge. Because in Jesus, there's always hope. If you read the next chapter of the Gospel of John, a council's called, and the Pharisees and the council members, they say, this guy's nuts. He needs to be stopped. This Lazarus thing was too much. And that's where they decide he ought to die. Jesus goes to the tomb of Lazarus, knowing he is in that moment trading his life for Lazarus's, and ultimately he will trade his life for all of ours. This is the thing that gets Jesus crucified. This is the moment where he decides, all right, the process starts now. He trades it life for life. Because sometimes we have a collective view of salvation, which is true, but it is life for life. Jesus is life for yours. And he'll make that decision every single time. And that gives us hope. Hope for healing now and hope for the great resurrection in heaven. Jesus wants to continue to perfect you, to make you new. That's what the cross is. Hope that even in the midst of our suffering, there's a God who suffers with us, who dies so that we may live, who in his humanity feels every bit of that crucifixion and thinks of you and me and says, I'm going to enter the tomb now and bring life out of it. Would you be so bold tonight as to do that? as to have a hope in a Savior who can heal you now and who wants to continue to heal you and guide you to heaven. Because I'll tell you something, if you go and open up that tomb, tonight you may find an incredible healing and a great peace, but you may find that tonight is the beginning of a journey. Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb and then looks at people and says, unbind him, because he still has bandages on. Jesus raises a little girl from the dead and looks at the people around her and says, give her something to eat. Jesus raises that son and he looks and says, give him to his mother. There's always another step in the process, right? And that process might be therapy. It might be talking to somebody about the situation. It might be seeking healing. It might be seeking medicine. It might be doing a couple more difficult things to untie the bandages, to re-nourish ourselves, to tell ourselves a new story that I'm beloved, that I belong to Jesus, that because I belong to Jesus, he saves me and trades life for life. And so he owns me. And he owns my garbage, and he owns that tomb, and he owns my death. And I'm going to start this process in the hope that Jesus will continue to make me new. I am being saved through my depression and anxiety. Jesus is glorified through it. And I'm being healed through it. And for me, it's a process. And for you, maybe it's a spontaneous healing. But you know what I know? That Jesus, through every step of the way, sometimes cries when I cry. That Jesus hurts when I hurt. That Jesus feels it. You see, God saves us and is saving us and will save you tonight. But you've got to go meet him at that tomb to begin the process of resurrection. Because it's going to happen in a moment with the grace. And then the grace is going to be there as you walk forward. But tonight, it can start. Jesus is waiting. As I've been talking, you know what that tomb is. And I want you to just take a second. If it helps you to close your eyes, I want you to do that. Because I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about a God who loved you so much through your sin and through my sin that he took on human flesh and felt every emotion and every bit of pain that meant, everything except sin. I'm going to tell you a story about a man who thought of you specifically, when he went to the cross and died so that you and I would have life in eternity. I'm going to tell you a story about a God who was there at that tomb when it happened and is there right now. What is it? Take a look inside. What's behind that stone? What's behind that wall? Where is Jesus standing? He's standing right next to it. I want you to imagine that. What does the face of our weeping Christ look like? And I don't want you to look at the ground. I don't want you to look off to the side in your imagination. I want you to look right into his bloodshot eyes. Tears streaming down his face. I need you to look right at him. What do you say? Jesus is standing next to this tomb. And behind it is a place that he wants to bring life into your life, where you are broken, where there is death, where you're confused, where you don't know. And he wants to inject grace into it. And maybe tonight it's a full healing, and maybe it's the start of this resurrection where you just get enough strength to start taking off the bandages. You belong to him, and that means he desires a full life for you. So what's behind that stone? What is it? Just even name it right now. Look at Jesus and say, I know that the thing behind the stone is this. Sit with that for a second. After Lazarus, Jesus is arrested. He dies. And then he rises. Lazarus would die again. So Jesus died for Lazarus twice. Just as he would die for you and I 1,000 times over out of his love, so that we may belong to him. Look into the eyes of a Savior who desires your heart and all that means, the broken pieces, the tombs, the dry bones, every single aspect of who you are. As he looks at you, it says, come out of there. Rise.